So, Kaiju number 8 has come to an end. After only 129 chapters of content, one of the most popular manga of the last 5 years has closed its door forever after really only completing one arc, one main antagonist, one key transformation, and that's all Kaiju number 8 had to show. But in the field of manga, where stories either go way too long and outstay their welcome, never finish at all, or don't stick their manga landings, after reading the entirety of Kaiju number 8 and reading its final 50-page chapter, I don't have a singular qualm with the way that Kaiju number 8 decided to go out. See, Kaiju number 8 didn't have a legion of unanswered questions at the ending of its manga, like JJK, it didn't downgrade its MC to borderline total irrelevancy like MHA, and it didn't introduce some otherworldly threat in hopes of gaining popularity for a sequel spin-off manga like Naruto. It was a self-contained story that maybe finished before it had to, but definitely didn't overstay its welcome. It gave happy, understandable, and concrete endings to every single important character in the story, all without feeling particularly rushed. However, this doesn't mean that the ending of Kaiju number 8 was 100% perfect. It was good, and I believe that a lot of current writing mangakas actually need to study Kaiju number 8 and how it decided to end so they can emulate the ending of their own manga after it. But like I said, the ending is not perfect. And thus today, I want to go over the ending of Kaiju number 8. I want to address some of the lingering plot lines, explain why the ending that a lot of the characters got is appropriate for them, and extrapolate on what I believe the future of the Kaiju number 8 universe looks like. Because, well, I don't believe there will be additional content coming out from the Kaiju number 8 universe, as I believe that Naoya Matsumoto is done with the universe. A lot of things are set up in chapter 129 that could be used to continue this story, and thus it's fun to speculate where those storylines might end up. All that is to say, today we're chatting about the ending of Kaiju number 8 because today we're talking the ending of Kaiju number 8 was perfect-ish. But before we get to chatting on the ending of one of the most popular manga on earth, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional Nick video a week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series in the fourth wall link using the description below. We're on to the Chunin exams, and, well, Naruto is facing off against Orochimaru. Before we get into all that, today we gotta talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, BetterHelp. Have you ever thought to yourself, I should see a therapist, but then never did it? This is a situation I found myself in recently. I was in a depressive funk. All my social interactions that I was having throughout the weeks felt like I was doing something wrong. And as an extrovert who feels the need to be surrounded by people constantly, that was crushing me. I felt afraid to be who I am, but I couldn't figure out why I felt afraid to be who I was. I was just anxious about every conversation I was having with anyone. And slowly but surely, I began to devolve into this thought process that maybe I'm just a bad person when everybody around me never said that about me. And thus in that moment, I understood that I needed to go to therapy, but I just couldn't motivate myself to do it. Therapy's expensive. I don't want to drive to a therapist's office. And that's when I remembered that I have BetterHelp, a therapy platform that can connect me with a therapist perfect for my needs, who I can talk to over the phone, over video messaging, or even over text messaging. A person who will listen to me, ask questions, and help me shift my perspective on what's going on in my life. And all I had to do to connect to that therapist was fill out a questionnaire, and I was matched with the perfect therapist to tackle the problems that I was dealing with in just a couple of days. But even if I wasn't connected to the right therapist the first time around, swapping therapists on BetterHelp is not only easy, but completely free. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in my description or go to betterhelp.com/weebcommander to get 10% off your first month of therapy. There's no such thing as a bad time to start working on yourself. So, to say that Kaiju number 8 sputtered into its ending is kind of a hyperbole, but also not entirely inaccurate. Kaiju number 8 for its first 100 or so chapters was a very, very consistently dropping manga, with Matsumoto, the mangaka, spending 3 weeks on and 1 week off per month, giving us 1.5 or 0.1 chapter a month. Now, somewhere in the region of chapter 76 or though, these 0.1 chapters became less and less frequent because the manga was just simply no longer being released on a somewhat weekly basis. And thus, as we got closer and closer to the ending of Kaiju number 8, if chapters weren't released weekly, it was bi-weekly or delivered tri-weekly or sometimes with entire months between 2 chapters, which clearly showed that Matsumoto really didn't have the capacity to keep up with the story at the tenor that they had in the beginning of it. However, fortunately, that didn't affect the quality of the manga, just the regularity of the release. And thus it was a whole month ago, in mid-June, when we saw that the combined forces of the Japan Defense Agency with Kafka, aka Kaiju No. 8, were able to defeat Kaiju No. 9, the main antagonist of this story. And in that chapter we had seen, after the transformed version of Kafka as Kaiju No. 8 blew away Kaiju No. 9's core, the grudges of all of the soldiers who had died in battle against Kaiju No. 9 1,000 or so years ago were beginning to fade away. And that wasn't a good thing because those grudges, aka Kafka's Kaiju core, were now his heart, as Kafka's heart was destroyed earlier in the battle against Kaiju No. 9. However, Isayao Shinomiya, who was inside of Kaiju No. 9 because he had been consumed, was able to halt the process of all of the grudges that make up the core of Kaiju No. 8 from disappearing from inside of Kafka. And thus it was through an injection of Isayao Shinomiya's heart into Kafka's chest that Kafka was able to maintain his human form that he had given up when he accepted the Kaiju No. 8 core as his heart, but also apparently, according to the beginning of the final chapter of Kaiju No. 8, also maintain the powers of Kaiju No. 8. See, because it's in the beginning of chapter 129 that we hear from Kafka as he tells us that the last thing that he could remember was Isayao Shinomiya fading away, and that when he came to, he was inside a defense hospital, and that he had been in a coma for 4 months. Now, to this moment, after Kafka wakes up, that he gets a rundown on basically all of the destruction that Tokyo faced during this Kaiju No. 9 cataclysm, during which apparently 1,316 kaiju emerged, 18 of which were Dai Kaiju, which is a kaiju with a fortitude over 8.0, and 7 of which were identified kaiju. Now, these 7 kaiju were kaijus 9 through 15, with 9 being the special case that Kafka referred to, and 10 through 15 being identified kaiju that were created by Kaiju No. 9. Well, actually, Kaiju No. 10 didn't show up in this battle. A new and improved version of Kaiju No. 10, Kaiju No. 12, did show up in this battle, and therefore the 7th identified kaiju was actually Kaiju No. 8. Sorry. Now, while reading this report, it stated that the Kaiju No. 9 cataclysm was the biggest kaiju cataclysm of all time. However, even with all of that considered, the damages and the casualties were substantially smaller than they should have been, and this is because of the valiant fight of the defense agency. However, Kaiju No. 8 being listed as one of the identified kaiju that popped up during the No. 9 cataclysm showed that the world, by and large, didn't know necessarily how to feel about Kaiju No. 8 even after he saved the world from Kaiju No. 9. I mean, well, yes, Kafka being Kaiju No. 8 wasn't open and talked about secret inside of the defense agency. It's not necessarily something known by the public, and considering the fact that the public is evacuated from any and all places a kaiju pops up, Kafka's innocence as Kaiju No. 9 is not something known to the grander public. And thus, after the events of the Kaiju No. 9 cataclysm, apparently people have begun to speculate about what exactly is going on with Kaiju No. 8. Is he a bioweapon created by the defense agency? Is he a space alien? Some theories even going so far as to saying that the No. 9 cataclysm was made to cull the population, and that Kaiju No. 8 was the mastermind of it all, puppeteering the defense agency to help him in this devilish scheme. Now, obviously, this is commentary on the fact that any kind of event of any kind of catastrophe in our real life world gets skewed 8 different ways, with every individual trying to make an event match their own worldview. And I thought it was kind of funny that when Kafka heard this most outlandish theory, he just turns to the TV and goes, okay, but why though? But anyways, after getting the rundown and all of the news is speculation and shaving his beard that he grew over the course of 4 months, we see Kafka begin to suit up as he tells us that any and all matters that have to do with Kaiju No. 8 have not been revealed to the public, as he thinks to himself that he's not entirely sure how he was able to maintain a human form, but inside of his chest he feels a beating heart of a human. And on top of that, when he looks inside of himself, he sees that Kaiju No. 8 is still inside him. Now, it's this point that Kafka begins to speculate that Isayao has kept the grudges inside of Kafka so that they can be used for modern-day national defense, answering simultaneously both how Kafka has retained his human form and how he has the powers of Kaiju No. 8. Like I said earlier, Isayao gave his heart to Kafka, allowing for him to maintain his human form. But now that apparently Isayao Shinomiya exists inside of Kafka in some capacity, he also operates as a wrangling pen for all of the grudges that make up the Kaiju No. 8 core, ensuring that they don't leave just because the grudge that they had against Kaiju number 9 has now been exercised. Now, Kafka does begin to speculate that maybe all of these grudge-bearing souls just want to help out in the new era, but I don't really think that's the answer. As we very much saw in the last chapter that all of the grudges were beginning to dissipate until Isayao popped in and told Kafka that he was going to survive and continue to fight. And while some of you may be wondering how Isayao was able to give his heart over to Kafka, it's important to remember here that Kaiju number 9 had an assimilation ability. An ability that allowed for Kaiju number 9 to assimilate other beings into its core and gain the abilities and strengths of those beings. It did it to Isayao Shinomiya, and it tried to do it to Mina Ashura. However, while Mina was able to escape from Kaiju number 9 with the help of Kafka, Isayao wasn't. However, that doesn't mean that Isayao wasn't still fighting inside of Kaiju number 9. He was. And while Kaiju number 9 was able to assimilate not only the fighting techniques of Isayao, but also the numbers weapon of Kaiju number 2 that Isayao was wearing, and therefore assimilate Kaiju number 2, we pop in and see Isayao multiple times inside of Kaiju number 9 and see that he hasn't given up the fight quite yet. And therefore, while his powers were assimilated, it's not like he was gone. And thus, as Kafka was the last person to come into contact with Kaiju number 9's core, this allowed Kafka to connect with Isayao at the moment of Kaiju number 9's death. Now, as to how Isayao was actually able to give him a heart, I can't really say, but I don't know, metaphorical mumbo-jumbo anime nonsense. Anyways, after Kafka's done self-reflecting, we see that Mina has walked into his hospital room, and she asks him, "Are you ready?" Now, he seems stunned to see her, and she seems relatively stunned to see him. However, after a moment of bated breath and silences, Mina tells Kafka, "I have a car waiting for you. Let's go." Now, once they get in the car, Mina and Kafka head over to Tachikawa Defense Base. Now, the Tachikawa base is where Division 3 stays. However, it was destroyed in the Kaiju number 10 attack. The attack that revealed to the entirety of the defense force that Kafka was not only Kaiju number 8, but also fighting on their side. However, because Tachikawa base was destroyed, all of the rookies of Division 3 had to be sent to other divisions. Now, once they get to Tachikawa base, Kafka and Mina start to do a walk down memory lane, where Kafka reflects on how he had multiple incredible experiences that formed him into the man that he is today at this very base. Whether it was Kikaru mandating to park in the parking spot that he had parked in, saying that 55 was her lucky number, bathing with his fellow comrades, or the induction ceremony, we basically do a review of the entire relatively short manga as Kafka walks through the space that was once home, as his base also held on to some bad memories, like when he was arrested after revealing that he was Kaiju number 8. And after walking through all of these memories, Kafka turns to Mina and says, "So I've finally returned home." And yeah, in actuality, this is the first time that Kafka has returned in any serious capacity to the Tachikawa base, the place where this entire story started, and therefore it is kind of a beautiful full circle moment. A full circle moment that's brought together by the fact that every single one of the important members of the 3rd Division is waiting for Kafka there. Whether that's Kikaru, Hoshina, Reno, Mina, Aoi, or Hachikura, the 3rd Division that was split up by the destruction of the Tachikawa base under the attack of Kaiju number 10 was now back together. And for the first time in a long time, Reno and Kafka are brought back together. As Reno tells Kafka, "I had faith you would return to us," which is a callback to what Reno told Kafka when Kafka was arrested for being Kaiju number 8. Now, at this point, the Kafka begins to get emotional, smacking himself in the face and ducking down to his knees, telling everybody with tears streaming down his cheeks and a smile on his face that he's glad to be back. However, Iharu, aka Pompadour Guy, takes a chance to absolutely barrel into Kafka, telling him he's glad that he's back, leading the charge of all of the important members of Squad 3 to go say hello and welcome back to Kafka. Now, at this point, that it's revealed that Ichikawa, aka Reno, Iharu, aka Pompadour Guy, Haruchi, Green Hair Guy, and Aoi, receiver of the demelanation Robin process in the anime, at the end of the next year after Kafka had returned to the Tachikawa base, had all been upgraded to platoon leaders. Now, for those of you who don't remember, the ranking system within the Defense Corps is rather simple. Cadet is the absolute lowest. The majority of the main cast of Kaiju number 8 are currently officers, and then above officers in rank is platoon leaders. These are usually people who are able to access somewhere in the region of 40% of the power of their suit, and are leaders of individual platoons of troops that exist under the vice captain and the captain. But because these four were able to step into this rather prestigious role very early into their career, with some of the more notable out of these four, like Reno, tuning to a numbers weapon, making them massively more powerful to a vice captain level, as Reno was able to assimilate to the number 6 weapon created from the corpse of Kaiju number 6, allowing Reno to release and control ice to go hand in hand with the cryo bullets that he preferred. And thus, because of the combined forces of these 4 platoon leaders, analysts at HQ speculated that Division 3 had become as powerful as Division 1 and was therefore in its golden era. And for those of you who don't know, Division 1 for a long time has been referred to as the strongest division, with not only Division 1's captain, Gen Narumi, existing as the strongest soldier in the defense force, but also all of the platoon leaders in Division 1 holding on to a level of power comparable to that of a vice captain or a captain in any other division. And thus, as these 4 prominent characters all became platoon leaders in Division 3, and Division 3 is actively being compared to Division 1 in terms of power, it's safe to assume that Ichikawa, Iharu, Haruchi, and Aoi have all achieved a level of power comparable to that of a vice captain or captain. However, because of how powerful the vice captain and captain are Division 3, that being Hoshina and Mina, they're not able to achieve that title themselves quite yet. Now, Kafka goes on to tell us that while it was expected that the amount of applicants would drop after the number 9 cataclysm, apparently applications quadrupled, which means that Vice Captain Hoshina and Captain Ashura were buried in more paperwork than they'd ever had in their entire lives as they were trying to filter out what applications to take into consideration. But this is mostly meant to show us that Japan's back was not broken by the number 9 cataclysm. In fact, the damage and destruction of the number 9 cataclysm incentivized more people than ever in Japan to join up in the battle against kaiju. Now, this is interesting, because there really is 2 possible ways that Matsumoto could have taken the ending of this story. Either the number 9 cataclysm was the end of all kaiju kind in the Kaiju number 8 world, or the number 9 cataclysm was simply just a bad day in a long history of the battle against the kaiju. Now, I actually believe that the number 9 cataclysm would be the end of kaiju kind in this universe, because there is a rather consistent rhetoric throughout the entirety of Kaiju number 8 that all of the people currently fighting in the defense force want to make a world where the children growing up right now never have to worry about kaiju again. In fact, this rhetoric can most recently be seen in the extra episode that dropped at the beginning of season 2 of Kaiju number 8. And thus, I believe that this concentrated effort of the defense agency against number 9, the oldest living kaiju on Earth, could possibly destroy the kaiju's ability to procreate and therefore bust out into the world. However, rather than doing this, it seems as though Matsumoto still wants the Kaiju number 8 world to have the problem of kaijus, but wants the defense agency to exist at such a high level that those kaijus become a much smaller threat than they used to be. And while I have no problem with that, that does make the Kaiju number 8 ending closer to that of Attack on Titans than I would have anticipated. As well, yes, the defense agency is getting stronger by the year, and they're all entering a golden era. That golden era doesn't last forever. In the same breath, the kaiju are also not only getting more common, but more powerful. And while maybe that increase in power for the kaiju was mostly because of Kaiju number 9, this ending does seem to suggest that there's going to be a continuous cycle of violence between humanity and the kaiju that may never go away. Anyways, the 4 side boys weren't the only people to receive promotions from the 3rd Division, as Kikaru Shinomiya also received a promotion to become the vice captain of 1st Division. And while this sounds kind of crazy, Kikaru Shinomiya has always kind of been the main character of this story. She has, at her highest, shown a 94% unleashed combat power, comparable to characters like Hoshina or Mina or maybe even Gen Narumi. She's shown the ability, after being given weapons number 4, to spar with Gen while he was using his own numbers weapon. She was able to battle against Kaiju number 15 by herself on equal footing, has been shown to be able to dispatch Kaiju with a fortitude of 7.0 or higher by herself, and is the first and only member of the defense agency we've ever seen use 2 number weapons simultaneously, as she was not only able to use number weapon 4, the number weapon her mother used, giving her immense speed on the battlefield and making her capable of flight, but she was also able to use numbers weapon 1 after it was given to her by Gen to allow her to predict the movements of her enemies. And therefore, not only is she the fastest person on the battlefield, she also has the ability to predict the movements of all of her enemies. Tie all this in with a giant axe, and you have a ridiculously powerful character who's not even 18 yet. I mean, the girl had an unleashed combat power of above 40 before she was even an officer. Daughter of Isayao and Hikari, 2 numbers weapons users, and yeah, the level of power that she was able to gain access to is not all that surprising. But don't worry, Vice Captain Hasegawa fans, with Kikaru being promoted to Vice Captain of Division 1, Vice Captain Hasegawa was actually sent to HQ to become a staff officer, whatever that means. And while Gen was initially upset with Hasegawa for leaving him and going to HQ, you see that Kikaru has perfectly stepped into the role of Vice Captain of Division 1 with her ability to calm down Gen. But it appears as though her ability to calm down Gen comes with the caveat that she fully believes that one day she will replace him as the captain of Division 1, aka the strongest soldier the Defense Corps has. Now, it's this point that the narrator, most likely Kafka, goes on to say that there were 7 identified kaiju during the number 9 Cataclysm, and that the remains of all 7 of those identified kaiju minus number 10, who had already been turned into a weapon for Hoshina, were put into storage, most likely so soldiers either now or in the future could test their ability to connect with them so they could possibly be turned into numbers weapons. And in fact, some of these identified kaiju remains are already going to be turned into numbers weapons, as apparently Kaiju number 12, rather appropriately the upgraded version of Kaiju number 10, showed affinity for Captain Soichiro. Now, for those of you who don't remember who Captain Soichiro is, he's Hoshina's brother, who serves as the captain of the Western Division, and thus as Hoshina is the wielder of numbers weapon 10, it would make sense that his brother, who's also a member of the defense force at a high level, would show affinity with the upgraded version of Kaiju number 10, Kaiju number 12. However, as all of these identified kaiju were not only crazy powerful, but also held on to some level of sentience, the defense corps isn't actually even sure as to whether or not they're going to convert these kaiju into weapons, with the most heavily guarded out of any of the kaiju remains being the remains of Kaiju number 9, which is being held in the deepest and darkest and most secure part of Ariake Base. Ariake Base, for those of you who don't remember, is the base name of Division 1, the largest and most secure base that HQ also operates out of. We then, after this exposition dump, cut back to Kafka, who's shopping in a convenience store. However, while trying to purchase some onigiri, the store begins to shake, and thus Kafka runs out, telling everybody who's panicking and running from the emerging kaiju that he works for the defense force and that everybody should listen to him and follow set evacuation routes. Kafka then checks in with HQ and Hoshina, who immediately tells him to not do anything too hasty. See, because apparently independent research facilities from all across the globe are trying to identify who Kaiju number 8 is. Now, as to who these research facilities are, we can't say with 100% certainty. However, it's safe to assume that Izumo Tech, who make all of the Kaiju Defense Agency suits from the remains of Kaiju, would probably like to get their hands on Kafka and Kaiju number 8 to A, better understand a symbiotic relationship between Kaiju and humans, and B, to increase the quality of their suits, aiding in the battle against Kaiju. And while this sounds like a good thing, it would also probably come at the cost of Kafka's life, which can be pretty much confirmed by the fact that Haruichi almost definitely knows that Kafka is Kaiju number 8, and Haruichi is the son of the president of Izumo Tech. And thus Haruichi not leaking Kafka's secret to Izumo Tech seems to imply that it wouldn't be good for Kafka if that happened. Now, Kafka relays to Hoshina that he understands that he'll stick to the rear guard to act as support until reinforcements arrive. However, before he's able to do that, he realizes that this kaiju was just about to eat 2 kids that look exactly like a young Kafka and a young Mina. And as these 2 kids are confronted with the fragile nature of their own mortality, the girl in the equation grits her teeth and says, "I'm going to join the defense force one day, and therefore that this is no time to be afraid of a guy like this." And thus she grabs a piece of debris and goes to defend herself. The boy then falls backwards on his butt, but in the distance he sees a billboard of Mina advertising to the public that the Japanese Defense Force is accepting applicants. And thus he also thinks to himself that they can't run away, and he grabs a rock, standing up to defend himself against this kaiju. Now the kaiju, clearly not afraid of these 2 children, dives in to eat them. But before it's able to get a mouthful of children's meat like it's eating a veal cutlet, we see that Kafka has grabbed the 2 children and saved them from the bite of the kaiju. And it's at this point that the narrator tells us that Kafka has officially been assigned to the 3rd Division after gaining trust because of what he accomplished during the number 9 Cataclysm. And thus he reveals that an actual new team was created within the 3rd Division called the Kaiju Analysis Squadron, or the Analytical Support Squad, of which he is the platoon leader, showing us that Kafka has stepped into a less combat-oriented role, leveraging the knowledge and experience that he has from breaking down kaijus for a decade or so to support those around him in their endeavors to destroy kaiju and dispose of them in the most efficient way possible. And now I know what some of you are saying,
"Oh, Kafka should be captain. Oh, Kafka should be vice captain. He should be on the front lines battling against the kaiju."
I'd like to remind all of you that people are actively trying to kill and disassemble him. The less time he spends fighting as Kaiju number 8, the less risk he is in for when he's not Kaiju number 8. However, for all of you who didn't want to see Kafka lose even an ounce of power after introducing through narration that he'd become the platoon leader of the Analytical Support Squad, he turns to the 2 children and says, "You held out well. I'll get you home safe, but in exchange for that, make sure you don't tell anyone what you're about to see." And it's that moment that he turns into Kaiju number 8 and lets us know through narration that occasionally he still fights as Kaiju number 8. And with that, the manga comes to a close, accomplishing everything that Kaiju number 8 set out to accomplish. Introduced a devastatingly important and powerful antagonist in Kaiju number 9, revealed that Kaiju number 9 has existed throughout centuries of battles against the defense force, dispatched of that main antagonist, gave a happy ending to the majority of the important characters in Kaiju number 8, delivered one crucial and devastating loss in Isayao Shinomiya, kept the main character as powerful as he was in the final battle against the final antagonist, slotted him into a job with the people that he loved, doing something that makes sense for him, and set up the world to live on without being observed by people like us. But if there's all these positives about how Kaiju number 8 has come to an end, well then, why isn't the ending perfect, and rather just perfect-ish? Well, fundamentally, there are some things that your average reader of Kaiju number 8 would want to know about that we never really got to know about. Like the secret behind why the kaiju began emerging when they did, how they were made, where they came from, how they could possibly be stomped out before they became a problem on the surface. See, while I do genuinely believe that ending an arc too early is better than ending an arc too late, I do think that another 100 chapters or so to flesh out what was going on with the kaiju, how they were created, and how Japan could possibly get rid of them forever would have been a huge addition to this story. The arc itself would have been rather simple. We've seen it in other kaiju stories like Pacific Rim or Godzilla or King Kong vs. Godzilla, where humans travel down into seemingly the center of the earth to find where these kaiju were coming from. And then with that tidbit of information and an insane amount of power, humanity is either able to stop the kaiju from coming to the surface or eliminate the kaiju altogether. While I don't hold any real grudge for the idea that Kafka and the defense force are just fighting against kaijus, maybe for the rest of time, I do think that 130 chapters is less than this story deserves. And I understand that this decision was most likely made because Matsumoto was either done with the story or just not in the headspace to finish it at the level of 200 or so plus chapters that I would have liked, and that's why you're not going to see me pitch a fit about it. But in my ideal world, yeah, sure, we've eliminated the main antagonist, but where did the main antagonist come from? Why haven't kaijus been around for all eternity? What happened in the 1300s to make them pop up out of nowhere? Or the 1600s? It's either like 1364 or 1634. I don't remember which. And in a much more minor way, I also would have loved to see this story end with some kind of romantic connection between Mina and Kafka. Listen, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the two of them being platonic friends. And if we wanted the two of them to end as platonic friends, that's fine, but I personally would have loved to see the two of them come together in a romantic aspect. But even if you didn't want the two of them to end up together, I would have liked some kind of emotional payoff of Mina telling Kafka he had done a good job, or something like that. Kafka's been rather singularly trying to dedicate himself to catching up with Mina for the entire story. And while he 100% accomplishes this, and he's stronger than Mina by the end of the story by a long shot, and you could say that it's implied that the two of them have a respect for each other's power, as they were both instrumental in the dispatching of Kaiju number 9, I would have loved for that kind of thing to be spoken into existence, rather than just kind of subliminally shown. And lastly, I would have loved for there to have been some kind of conversation between Kafka and Kikaru, whether that was just Kafka giving Kikaru some kind of closure about what happened with her father at the end of his life, or Kafka even telling Kikaru that Isayao lives on inside of him. I get that we see Kikaru visiting the graves of her parents, and that's supposed to act as some kind of closure for the loss of her parents, and I get that she's also instrumental in the killing of Kaiju number 9, which acts as revenge for Kaiju number 9 absorbing Isayao in the first place. I don't think really anything would have been lost if Kafka and Kikaru talked about her father. And really, the most minute detail out of all of them, Haruichi and Aoi should have kissed. That's, string me up, but it should have happened. Two guys tied to each other at the hip, always disappearing with each other and going on hiking trips. Okay, I've seen that movie, Brokeback Mountain. But outside of that, Kaiju number 8 will go down as a fun manga. A condensed, compact, well-told, well-drawn, and high-octane story, with an ending that doesn't leave you upset, but certainly doesn't leave you in awe. And in a world where every manga seemingly has to be mid or peak, I really do appreciate stories like this. So while I'd be sad to see Kaiju number 8's manga not posting on a somewhat weekly basis anymore, I mean, no, not really. But is it absolutely in my list of starter mangas to recommend to people? 100%. And that's just fine. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What did you think about the ending of Kaiju number 8? What did you think about Kaiju number 8 as a whole manga? Do you want more content? Are you happy with what they gave us? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. It is kind of crazy that this new gen of manga really don't break that 200 chapter mold all that often. Like even Chainsaw Man, I believe, is coming to its logical end. I don't think we're going to see a manga break 400 chapters for a while yet.